This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, everybody. So this is Darren with New England Basecamp. So we are in the middle of the summer with our virtual speaker series. Today we are joined by Barbara Freeman. Barbara is has her master's degree from MIT in architecture. She's a trained architect and a planner. Her background is environment and behavioral research from Stanford and MIT, and this has contributed to her abilities as an architectural programmer and space planner. Her research concerning the interaction between behavior and the built environment informs her design of environments which promote the well-being of people and for all people and children, the elderly and special needs group. Barbara, I will say, is a very well-traveled as I'm looking through her resume and looking at her experiences worldwide, and that is definitely cultivated in her world view and her thought through study and travel. So I'm looking forward to asking some questions specifically about that as well. Currently, she is the vice chairman of the Nature Conservancy Board in New Hampshire, and she joins us today. All right, welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. And I've gotten some direction here as to what I'm supposed to be talking about. You should know that at this point, I'm retired, so I will be talking about my career in the past and then how it's led to what I'm doing now. I came into architecture a little bit later because when I was young, when I was in high school, I was told by my guidance counselor that although I had really high scores in what they called abstract reasoning, which is what an engineer needs, that he didn't think my scores in mathematics were adequate enough for me to really pursue architecture. So I thought, well, I guess I can't do that. Of course, at that day and age, they told women that they couldn't pursue a lot of these types of things. So I was also told that I couldn't be a veterinarian because they didn't let many women into vet school. But this is ages ago, so I'm thankful that things have changed a lot. But I bring that up because if you're ever discouraged by someone telling you you can't do something, you try. If you believe in it, you try and you keep doing it. So it wasn't until I had finished my undergraduate degree, and which was in political science, actually. And I was working in research in Stanford University in California, doing psychology research. And we were looking at the effect of the built environment on behavior. It was at that point I decided that I could be an architect and applied to architecture schools. And among other schools, I did get into the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in their master's program. And from there, I would say that my education was varied in that I also pursued planning because I have a big picture mind. You know, the urban scale is interesting to me. Planning and regional planning is interesting to me. So I did both of those things at MIT. And when I left school, I worked for some prominent architects that did that kind of work. And I also worked for some world-class architects in Italy. And so I would say that I have a well-rounded architecture and technology background. I was asked, what's the day-to-day life like for an architect? That is hugely varied. And one of the reasons that I chose architecture, besides really enjoying design, is the variety of what you need to know and what you need to do. Architecture is a career where you're actually learning all your life because it's a very complicated discipline. You really need to know about every system in a building. You need to know about the structures. You need to know about the impacts, environmental impacts. There's just so much to learn. And I would say that if you have a characteristic that you have an inquiring mind and you're curious about things and you're excited about learning and information, it's just a fantastic career. It's wonderful. But it is not necessarily a high-paying career. If you're out for money, you know, architecture is probably not the career for you. However, the fulfillment quotient is way up there. And one of the things that I would say was important to me is I have values, and my values informed what I did in architecture. So a lot of my work in the beginning of my career was in low-cost housing, public projects, working in the community, doing urban design level things. I've done airport plans. I've done all sorts of projects, and it's been a really exciting and interesting career. But again, my values inform that, and that's probably why I'm doing what I'm doing now in retirement, which is working with nonprofits to help them with vision and with understanding how to help people. I have actually pro bono designed buildings in Ghana, Africa, and I'm probably just about to start a building in Niger, it's also in Africa, for two different nonprofits. And so I'm doing them pro bono because I can afford to do that pro bono. A lot of times you do work for free because you believe in it, and because you get paid enough by other jobs that you're supported. So, so the job that I'm doing in Niger is for Rain for the Sahel and Sahara, which is it's actually the U.S. offices in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, but you can find it online if you're interested. And so that's pretty much it. I think I've stayed under 10 minutes, haven't I?
You have. So Barbara, so when you say that you are building the building, so are you doing the design, or are you actually helping with the, I mean, so what exactly is your involvement with specifically, well, yeah.
That's a very good question, because it depends on the firm that you're in. Somebody's turned on their camera. Hi there, Olivia. It depends on the firm that you're in. And Olivia, could you turn off your camera?
Hey, turn off your camera for me. Thank you.
Yeah, she did it. It depends on the firm that you're in, and also the role that you're in. In my particular case, because I was a principal in a firm, I would follow a project all the way through, from the very beginning of concept of what exactly is the project, all the way through construction and supervising construction. And so it includes design is a big part of it. I had my own firm from 1991 on, so I was supervising staff who were producing drawings for the projects, and reviewing drawings, and helping clients hire contractors, and reviewing construction. So the whole thing.
So so you're definitely a pathfinder for sure. I mean, so when we think about statistics, it's only like 22 or 23% of architects are females. It's a very small percentage-wise, even, or at least we have a partnership with Wentworth Institute of Technology. Their architecture department is who our partnership with.
I had a staff person.
And so
I had a staff person.
So they are
from there, and he was really good.
They're really good, and they're really good friends of ours to be able to teach. In fact, several of our students from our drafting and our architecture program 2 weeks ago got into their summer program. So I'm very happy, which I get credit for college, because both these girls were seniors and they're interested in architecture. I was happy to be able to help that one on. But I mean, so I guess it's a two-part question. I mean, definitely there still is not very many females within architecture. So, I mean, is that difficult? And then I want to ask about the nonprofit part of the world as well. I mean, so you are going into identifying nonprofits to be a mixture about whether it tends to be all male or all female. And so is that consistent with your experience, and how have you overcome or used that from a positive aspect of it?
Well, I think that, when you're a minority in a system, and this is probably generalizable to all minorities, um, females being a minority in a particular situation. Frankly, I never thought about it that way.
Okay.
I'm the type of person that when I have a vision or when I have a goal in mind, I have incredible, what my father would have called stick-to-itiveness. I'm just really determined, and maybe sometimes to a fault. But because of that, I think that being a woman never stood in my way. And having listened to a few other prominent minority CEOs recently, because since Black Lives Matters, there's a lot of learning opportunities online, which we should all take advantage of. Listening to people who have made it in their profession and are at the top of their profession, and they're in a minority group. And a lot of them have said that they have not, they're aware of it and they've had disadvantage because of it, but they have never let it stop them. And I feel like I'm privileged because I am a white person, but I have had to, because I was born in 1951. I came through the women's movement, and a lot of the stuff that I went through, girls now, they do have some of it still, but it was more prevalent then, and more blatant, let's put it that way. It's still prevalent, but it was more blatant. And I was fortunate at MIT that it was when MIT had made a real commitment to have women students in its architecture department. And so I think there were, probably 32% women then. I mean, before that, it was like 5%. It was really low.
Right.
And when I worked in Italy, I worked in an all-male office. I mean, I was the only woman in an Italian male office. And
Right.
so, and I had a blast. I had a great time with these guys. I mean, it's you make it what you want to make it. And I like people. I like men as well as women. So I think that comes off, that, if you're accepting and you're likable and you work hard and you do your job as well or better than anybody else, you're okay.
Yeah. Your stick-to-itiveness, your comment your father made, I would think that would be definitely true for anybody that goes through architecture, or anybody that goes through the MIT system. I mean, so the architecture MIT system, I would think your stick-to-itiveness definitely would be required to be able to complete and finish that as a general rule.
Yeah, it's grueling.
That is what I mean, all my friends who are architects all warn me about that.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody I know at MIT warns me about MIT, so it's like a double whammy from that aspect of it.
Yeah, that expression. There's that expression. It's like taking a drink from a fire hose. That originated at MIT, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe. So lots of questions. So I want to jump back to, and I apologize, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to jump back to your work with Rain, and Rain, excuse me, Rain. And then, so when you do these, is it just Rain? There's a Rain on the Sierra, or Rain close?
Rain. You can just call it Rain. Rain for the Sahel and Sahara. And
okay, that's it.
The reason for the name is that the Sahel, which means shore in Arabic, is right below the Sahara, and it's also very dry. Okay. And so if you bring rain, that you're bringing life to that area. So that's where the name Rain comes from.
So when you decide on that project or decided to work with that, did you get to travel there and kind of meet them and kind of get a good understanding about that? Is that part of the project? Or you said they're based, so how did that partnership come about?
Yeah. Well, I joined them as a board member rather than as an architect. And
Gotcha.
I became acquainted with them through a friend who had been on their board. And I met the board and liked the people, and I liked the mission. You have to, if you are going to work for a charity, you have to believe in the mission. And their mission is to bring education and opportunity to the nomadic and rural peoples of Niger. And, or in English, it's pronounced Niger. It's a French colony, so Niger is pronounced Niger there. And when I joined the board, I had not been there yet, and but I have been there since then. And I've been to the campus where I'm going to be designing the building as well. But I've seen the programs work, and I met the people, and I spent time with the people, and it's a pretty amazing culture.
Well, and I would expect as well, especially with projects and nonprofits. I mean, I think a lot of it's getting to meet the people and getting to know them and truly see the impact that the nonprofit makes as well. So being able to go there is definitely a huge part of that.
Yeah. But in architecture, I think you do that all through your career. If you're a really good architect and don't have too much ego, what you're trying to do is to make an environment that people can really enjoy and flourish in. And so you need to listen to your clients. You're in a service economy. You're providing buildings that people can live in, people can work in, and you have to listen to your clients.
Do you have a favorite building?
Do I have
architectural
a favorite?
wonder?
Well, the last one I just finished. You know, every time the last one, you know, oh, this is great. And then I go and do another.
We had in our architecture class last week, one of the requirements for the scouts to earn the architecture merit badge is that they have to look at famous architects, and then we also have to look at the environmental, like more of a sustainability architecture, and more about the relations of how buildings relate to the environment that they're in. So, you know, we look at things like Franklin Lloyd Wright, you know, which is the easy one off the ones, and then we take it to the other extreme, and then we look at like the Guggenheim Museum in Bilboa, for example, for the contrast between the architecture wonder. So something that's, you know, the waterfall, yeah,
falling water.
Thank you. As soon as I said, I knew it wasn't right. Falling water, and then we look at the Bilboa Guggenheim. It's like these are the two contrasts on that one, and we get to talk a little bit about how they relate and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty much fun.
Cool. So did you want me to comment on that?
I'm sorry, you broke up. Yeah, sorry.
No, I just said cool.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, so it's always nice to. So we have some questions in the chat. Let's see if we can get some of those answered. Let's see. A lot of questions about this. Does the job? So you already mentioned that job involves some overseas travel. Is that just dependent on how much you are willing to lead to the experience of variety projects? So I guess the question is, I mean, if you're willing to travel, and does that increase your ability to go be creative with the project? So compared to an architect or somebody that's going to stay in where they currently are.
Well, if I understand the question correctly, it sounds like there's almost two questions there. One relating to the opportunity to travel and whether that impacts whether you're going to get a certain job or not. Is that the first part of the question?
Yeah, it sounds like it. A little bit about and more about, or is it the willingness to do that, or is it to travel, or is it the experience leads to that travel?
It's the experience that leads to the travel. Yeah, I mean, it can go either way actually, because if you definitely want to travel and work overseas, there are ways that you can pursue that so that you do work overseas. So that's one thing. And then you can work for a firm which has work overseas and end up going overseas. In my particular case, I did the first. I actually was in a studio in Italy, and from there applied to 2 different jobs in Italy and ended up working there for 3 years. So I made the concerted effort to work there. So you can do that. And you can end up working on a project overseas if you work for a firm in the United States that does that kind of work. It's usually a larger firm. But in terms of the other part of the question, does it make you more creative? I think that as a designer, the more you can expose yourself to different design and aspect of design and be observant, the more it adds to your creativity sort of foundations. You have sort of more in your library to work with, and so I think it does add to creativity. So I think that was the second part of the question.
Yeah, I think so too. So with that being in mind, do you find that when you're designing a project or when you're going to a new design, especially one like the one that you're working with, Rain, that you pull in other elements, maybe some of your Italian experience, some of your New Hampshire experience, and your African experience into the element, or do you typically still try to put focus on? So that's again, no, that was in, or again, do you put really heavy focus on the architecture design specifically for that area of the world, or do you find yourself putting a little Italian in there and a little American MIT in there as well?
Well, I start every project looking at the site in great detail, which I think is what you discussed in your sessions with architecture. The site really informs incredibly what the building should be. But part of the site is the climate and the direction of the sun, the winds, how much rainfall you get, and what time of the year you get rainfall. And in different parts of the world, those vary quite considerably and can really impact a building quite heavily. So, for example, the building that I designed in Ghana, I took references from there, visual references. If I start using jargon that you don't understand because it's architectural jargon, ask me to clarify it. But anyway, I took references from the local markets and how they built their buildings. My effort in that case was to design a building that was both sensitive to the climate, but also was something that could be built by local craftsmen and the skills of local people, so that they would be familiar with how to build it because they knew all of these forms. So I used materials, like there's a sandcrete block that's, they don't have access to a lot of good concrete, and so the concrete has to be a structural framework, and then these sandcrete blocks, which they can use of less concrete and mix it with sand, and then they basically sit it out in the sun to cure, and that can be the infill that's not structural. And so I looked at all those elements in designing the building, and along with, the direction of the wind and having the wind air condition the building, so you wouldn't have to rely on mechanical air conditioning. So all of these things go into the way you think about designing a building. And the form, which is what people think about with design, that was informed by the local small buildings that they have in the markets, so that people there wouldn't feel, they would feel welcome in this building. You can build a building that looks so monumental and so strange that if you're in a rural community, it's so unfamiliar, they don't want to go in it. So you have to build it in such a way that they feel welcome and that it's in some way familiar to them. And the same thing will happen in Niger. Their heat is incredible heat, dryness, et cetera, is a big factor. And so I'll be using a lot of the local traditional building techniques there. There's a technique called sans bois, which means without wood, because they don't have a lot of it. And it's basically an earthen construction, and it's so similar to our Southwest adobe construction. And I'll be using that to inform how I build the building.
So that was going to be you stole my next question. I was going to say, is it more like an adobe aspect of it, or is it more like the rammed earth type style from a building construction aspect of it? You answered it with the adobe one already. So
yeah, it's sort of a cross between the two. It's one that actually needs to be maintained. If you've ever seen some of the buildings in that part of the world, they actually have permanent stakes, like rods sticking in the building that are they use those to climb up the building to keep the stucco on the outside of the building refreshed, because when it rains there, it's like the Southwest, it rains in torrents, and it can actually rip apart the exterior of the building. So they keep, patching it and periodically with additional mud, if you will.
it's interesting. I have seen building. I just never realized that that's what the rebars or the bar was for. Interesting.
Yeah.
Couple more questions. Let's see. Over the years that you worked in architecture, how do you think the advancement in technology has helped the progress of what it is today?
Hugely. I think that in our architecture, in the building trades, the thing that holds back our advancement in being more, to make a shortcut in being more green, let's say, is actually the clients and the contractors, because contractors tend to be very conservative because they have to stand by their work, and they're reluctant to try a lot of times something really new, because if it doesn't work, their client's calling them back. Okay, so that's one way that it's held up. But in addition, clients many times hold it up. You have to have a really progressive client to advance some of the more advanced technological things. We can, in Germany, they have super insulated housing that you could heat with a light bulb. And we could do that here, but people object to spending the money up front because it is more costly. And therefore, they don't want to spend the money then, and they end up spending it over time on their heating bills instead. And so the technology is there. It's fantastic. The thing that I'm not always happy with is actually computer-aided design, because design a lot of times is informed by the tools that create it. And I always start with hand drawing, and I recommend to all of your listeners that you learn to hand draw, learn to sketch, learn to draw a building, because you can think more creatively with a pencil in your hand than you can on the computer. And it's not just because I'm old that I say this, because I noticed, computers are orthogonal tools. They make this kind of movement always. They don't make this kind of movement. And sometimes what you want to do is make this kind of movement. And if you do that initially, you can turn it into a computer drawing. And there's incredible computer technology to do that now. But in terms of your mind functioning, there is a connection to the hand that you don't get from a computer.
So I'm glad you said that. At least half of the people here were in one of the drafting of the architecture class, and that's the requirements actually say you have to use CAD and all that kind of stuff. And I am adamant that you start off by sketching, and then you resketch it a second time, and you resketch it a third time before you move over to the CAD. And so one of the architects that we have come tour it is that I'm like, so Joe is the one who typically comes. And I'm like, so tell me your process. And he's like, well, it starts off with sketching. I'm like, all right, everybody, all you people that told me that I was wrong, because kids are like, the scouts are like, let's just jump to the CAD part of it. We did our quick little sketch, and I'm like, no, we do it.
Yeah, good. Glad you do.
We'll do one more because I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we'll probably ask one or two more questions, and then so if you got a good one, now's the time to answer it. I think, so we got another one from San Francisco that's coming. There's two. Which one do I want to go with? I like the based on the current forecasted climates at the time and how stable the ground beneath is. Expanding and contracting with clay. How would you change the structure of the building to suit this, and why is that the case? So,
That's interesting. There's actually two questions there because
he's good about asking multiple. He's really good about asking multiple questions at the time.
Yeah,
that's all session.
One is to deal with climate change. One of the things that I've learned, and this comes from MIT, is that when you design a building, it's important to design flexibility into the building. And that means flexibility in terms of use, but also in terms of sort of predicting the life of the building. In fact, there's a discipline in England, which is, and it's not, I think it's done more now, but it's, you actually do an analysis, a life analysis of a building and how much energy it's going to consume, et cetera. Okay, but if you're thinking about climate change and you're thinking about general trends of more extreme weather and greater heat, maybe more cold sometimes in some places, but you want to maximize your envelope on the building. The building envelope is key to an efficient building. If you keep out infiltration of air and you adequately insulate, and I mean sometimes super insulate, and that goes well for heat and cold, then you're basically prepared. The question about foundations and drying out of clay and therefore things happening to foundations, that on a project, if you're you really want to question building on clay. Because of that, it's not just climate change that makes clay an unpredictable substrate. And so you're always going to have a civil engineer on a bigger project. And the civil engineer is going to take cores of the soils and do, if it's a heavy building, they'll be doing analysis of the cores and how much weight the core can support, et cetera. And in the case of clay, they may require that you dig it all out, in fact, because of what you mentioned in your question, it expands and contracts, and it can be a very detrimental to a foundation. So two different questions, two very good questions, but rely on your civil engineer for that one.
All right, so I want to ask one last question. It's going to be a question for me. So it's going back to what you said before about the design and using the design that you used your example about Germany, the fact that really the technology is already here to be able to do that. I mean, we've seen climate change from us older people on the call. We'll remember climate change as talked about in the 80s and then of course in the 90s, and now it's definitely more of a real conversation being really forced more by youth and by the younger generation that's really forcing that climate change conversation, whether that's Greta or whoever is going to force that conversation. What do you think? I mean, and I love the green designs. I think it's fantastic. What do you think has to be the tipping point for us to be able to truly commit to that green design? And what do you think? What's going to be the one that finally makes our generation, us older generation, to say, yes, okay, we are going to commit to this?
Oh boy, wish I had a crystal ball.
Me too.
You know, it's been shown, I mean, this is part of my work for the Nature Conservancy, actually, is that we've been, because a lot of the national environmental programs have been basically defunded, a lot of pressure has been put on states and further pressure on private industry. And one of the things that we found in New Hampshire that at the Nature Conservancy is we've pulled together partners to bring in businesses to discuss how they have improved their facilities and their energy consumption and what they've done to make themselves. I don't think they're thinking of it as being green. I think they're thinking of it as being economic. In the capitalist society, so much is driven by economics. So we're holding conventions, not conventions, but we're convening breakfasts and talks and having people participate and talk about what they're doing in their company and the impact it's had on their bottom line, and et cetera, et cetera. And that is having more effect than just saying, oh, you have to deal with climate change. The fact that these companies are seeing a real impact on their bottom line and what they can, the money and the security that they have as a company because they're being more economical, that is having a huge effect in New Hampshire, much more than probably a government would. But I think the government should have a role in this. I mean, it has been had in the past, but a lot of that has disappeared. In Germany, it's a governmental thing. I mean, they promote green building.
Yeah, well, no question. I lived in Sweden for 10 years, and that definitely is the case as well. And I agree with you. I mean, we could look at it from a the thing about Texas. So I grew up in Texas, is where I live in Boston now. Lived in Sweden for 10 years, but I grew up in Texas. And Texas has increased in being one of the nation's leading wind power users or generators.
Yeah.
And they definitely, the ranchers who I know who put the turbines on their property, they don't really care about the environment from an environmental aspect of it. I mean, it's definitely from an economic point of view. So I definitely think that you are correct about that. Well, so I don't want to. I'm already went a little bit longer than I said I was going to go with the conversation. I love these type of conversations. So, Barbara, I just want to first by thanking you for joining us today,
You're welcome.
and thanks the scouts and participants. Thank you for what you do, and I definitely thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. And then for all the scouts, thanks for joining in and presenting some phenomenal questions. And please join us again for another speaker series.
Great. Thank you so much for including me. And good luck to you guys. Work hard.